Black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Hey, listen, I'm really excited today because once again I have on our show 2018 New York best-selling author Robin DiAngelo for the book White Fragility: Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. Listen, whenever I get a chance to give people of this ilk on the show, I enjoy having a talk with them. And this season, we're focusing on now what? Some people think that everything is all back to normal because we have a new president and we have a vaccination and the racism problem thing is licked, right? Not so much. So Dr. DiAngelo stopped by a little bit just to have a discussion with me so that we can just talk about things that's happening in our world, but to hear from her own lens and from her own words. Now what? What are the next steps we need to take? What do you see that white people really need to understand now? And what do we need to be focusing on to make sure that we don't lose momentum in this time? You're going to enjoy this episode, I guarantee you. So I'm very excited about having Dr. Robin DiAngelo back on Black Like Me. Dr. DiAngelo, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm just doing well. Thank you. I'm so happy to be with you again.
Yeah, this is really great. Well, you know, our world has changed a lot since we've last spoken. When I interviewed you last, you'd called into the studio, and the world was a little bit more sane than it is now. So I'm just going to jump into it. You've helped to open the eyes of many people in the academic world and more the world of theoreticians and practical folks and understanding white privilege and why it's hard for white people to talk about race. I'm just curious, has the discussion of race been easier for white people in your estimation since 2020, or is it harder?
I'd like to think that it's easier. It's certainly on the table. I think both sides, if you will, are amplified, right? I mean, you know, the Confederate flag was flown in the Capitol. White nationalism is explicitly on the rise and growing and recruiting. And the Black Lives Matter is global at this point. When the president literally says, the new president, systemic racism is an urgent issue. When he says white supremacy is an issue, I mean, we're in a different moment. And for folks that do the work that, you know, Dr. Moore and I do, that systemic racism is finally understood in the mainstream, or I should say it's in the mainstream. Whether it's fully understood is another question. You know, we're moving past this really simplistic idea of what racism is. So all of that is wonderful, but the amplification is also making it very challenging. The forces of resistance are alive and well.
Sure. You know, I'm engaged in this work as well. Dr. Moore and I talk about this a lot. I think I swung in 2020. I swung between a feeling that was just being totally incredulous about what was happening in the world, but also wanting to say, I told you, folks, this thing wasn't done. Was that part of your reaction to? And when I say 2020, I will even add the events of the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. But did you find that, you know, that your position was, oh my God, I didn't think we could sink to this flow? Or was your thought, this is where we're heading, people?
Well, I wish I could say that I saw it. You know, I am white. I have worked long and hard to have a much deeper and more nuanced understanding of racism than I was raised to have. You know, when the neo-Nazis did a Nazi salute upon the inauguration of Donald Trump, I mean, it was pretty clear where we were. And the degree, the support from the highest halls of power, the inability to condemn white supremacy openly, not just from, Trump, but from many Republicans. That's something I just didn't expect. The hypocrisy is so clear and open. I do find myself continually dumbfounded by it. And I don't know that we can go back to a time when truth mattered.
Wow. Wrong. In speaking to many of my Black colleagues, we talked about the pressure of the pandemic, its impact on Black lives, Black bodies, being quarantined, having family members who were essential workers and afraid to go to work, and those who lost their jobs. It was it was a very, very stressful year. And I think and I talked about that. I blogged about it. I talked about it in the podcast. So I think for a lot of my listeners, many of whom are white, never associated white supremacy and the psychological impact of it on Black people and people of color. I think that that's an aspect of what happened in the past year that's somewhat new. Would you agree that there's more of awareness of the connection of those two?
Yeah, there's three terms that are new to me from this last year, and one is the concept of weathering, racial weathering, and that connects to a concept called allostatic load. And allostatic load is what happens when someone is exposed to chronic trauma and stress, and racial weathering is when that particular trauma and stress is racial trauma and stress. So
Yes.
already Black folks face weathering from centuries of the traumatic stress of racism. And so we saw that in, the outcomes of COVID, right? The much harsher impact on Black bodies. It's a structural, right? It's structural in the sense of our institutions, but there's also the weakened resistance, if you will, from just generations of chronic trauma and stress. And then Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, she's a legal scholar. She coined the term intersectionality. She has this concept of disaster white supremacy, right? How the project of white supremacy uses disasters to compel itself, right? To accelerate. And so we can see that happening too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Part of my work, I run a nonprofit that focuses on strengthening the African American community through leadership development processes to really influence and change the face of leadership. And so not having people focus on what has been problematic in the past, but who were they before a disaster struck, and how do they parlay that into places of healing for their lives and for the community. So my folks who run our reentry program, they were formerly incarcerated. So there's some real a real sense of power and empowerment, I should say, in our work. But I'm noticing that we're having to amp that up in our training, because before, I think people felt that they could see the light at the end of the tunnel, that things are difficult, but if we band together and we work together as African Americans, we have this history of resilience. It looks like things are going to be going well, and we're going to have a sane president, in the Oval Office. But I feel like the events of the insurrection caused the folks we serve to take a huge step backwards. Because I've got to tell you, my initial response wasn't even just the racial overtone or undertone, however you want to voice it. I just thought, ooh, you can't do that to the Capitol. Like, oh, that's like you can't burn the flag, you can't drop it on the ground. You can't do that. And then I thought, wait a minute, they were Black, they'd be dead. And so then the racial piece started coming on. And so I feel that even as we fought to get through 2020, and we've been teaching people leadership strategies, I feel that the events of January 6th is making us rethink our strategies of how we help Black people, in the case of our nonprofit, to really navigate these spaces, because I don't know how you unsee what we saw.
Yeah, it's so bold and so bold. Um, you know, I'm thinking about when you began to talk just now, I was thinking about the concept of hope, right? Because what I heard you saying is there kind of was this sense of hope for people, and now that's kind of been dimmed.
Right.
And I see hope as political. uh, I see all emotions as political in the sense that the framework that we're perceiving through, that we're making meaning through, is shaping the feelings that we have, right?
Sure.
And that framework is a political framework. This is why 20 years ago, if you said, Robin, what you just said is racist, I would have had a particular emotional reaction that is
Right.
very different than the emotional reaction I have today, because the framework that I would interpret that through is different than it was. And emotions are also political because though they engender actions, right? So I would not
Right.
just have felt different 20 years ago, I would have responded different. And that would have affected you, right? We externalize. And hope, for sure. I can't speak to hope for you as a Black person. That's not my place. But for me as a white person, I think there's a constant tension, right? How do we stay inspired? How do we keep adapting? Because systemic racism is a highly adaptive system. It adapts to challenges. As we can see, look at the adaptation it made to the presidency of Barack Obama. I mean, I think in large
Yes.
part what we're seeing is the eruption of resentment, a white racial resentment at 12 years, or excuse me, 8 years under a brilliant Black man. Right. And
Right.
so it's adapted in a way that we're seeing things that we didn't think people could get away with. Oh, they got away with that. So now we have to change our strategies. And so hope can keep us, focused, but it can also cause us to be complacent. I mean, look at following the civil rights movement, how confident so many white people were, that racism was over and we could just carry on. And now, Voting Rights Act is almost gutted. So I just how we use these feelings. So I'm thinking, on the one hand, I don't want us to just talk about how awful it is and cause people to just sink, and then
Sure.
that's not going to be effective. But we also can't be naive and ever take for granted, any progress that's been made.
Sure. I would love for you to speak, um, again, a large portion of my listenership is white, because people want to listen to African American people talk about what it's like to be Black, and to hear our stories of brilliance, but also how we have to be careful to navigate predominantly white spaces. And you talked about the politicization of the concept of hope. I have a lot of people in Wisconsin. Our state motto is forward. We went blue for Obama. We went red for Trump. We went blue now for Biden. There's a feeling that because Democrats are in the office, because Biden's in the office, Trump is a thing of the past, and we can ride off into the sunset. And there's this fictitious sense of hope. So the theme of this season, this is my season 5, is now what? Because we have all these changes, and are we just waiting and thinking that things are okay? So help me talk to my white listeners who think Democrats are going to fix this. Trump is gone. There's no personal culpability or responsibility. America now can become great. What's the danger of thinking that Biden and Harris are now our silver bullet?
Right. I mean, I think you just named it in that kind of, okay, now we're fine. Now we can just relax.
Right.
The forces of systemic racism are powerfully seductive for white people. I'm going to put it like this.
Okay.
The status quo of this society is racism. That is the norm. It's not an aberration. It is the default of our society. It reproduces racist inequality
Yeah.
very effectively and very consistently. And I live, love, work, play, create, worship in a society in which racism is the norm, in racial comfort as a white person.
Mm.
Let's just pause for a minute. I'm comfortable in a racist society
Mm.
virtually every day. And so that there's a couple points there. We are not going to get where we need to go from a place of white comfort. That should be a red flag. And there's a difference between comfort and pain. There's a difference between comfort and not being safe, right? I'm not saying, that we have to be in pain, but comfort, right? So
Right.
anything that causes us to breathe out a sigh of relief as white people and think we can relax now is generally a red flag of complacency, and we have to constantly check ourselves against it. We can look across history and see every moment we thought we were done, my goodness, have we not been done. And so yeah, we always want to ask ourselves, this is a question that's never failed me as a white person trying to unpack this. And that question isn't, is this true or false? Is it true that we're done? Is it false that we're done? The question is, how is this functioning? How does my hope function? Does it cause me to just, think that everything's got a happy ending and we're going to move on? How does this idea that, phew, we're finally okay now because we have Biden, if anything that functions to have me, well, this is going to be the theme, be complacent, is problematic and should be checked.
Hi, this is Dan Groupie from Winona, Wisconsin. I listen to Black Like Me because it brings alive for me what it means to be a Black person living in Wisconsin and living in the United States through people's stories and lived experiences. And this show has helped me to understand my role as a white person in either allowing racial disparities and injustices to be perpetuated or to take a more active role in dismantling these systems. And I'm a Patreon supporter because I feel like it's critical to amplify this message and help bring more people to the fight.
Now, in its 5th season, the award-winning Black Like Me podcast has a reach throughout the U.S. in over 100 countries around the world. It is the work of a dedicated team of people here in Madison, Wisconsin, dedicated to changing the conversation surrounding race. When you sign up to support Black Like Me as a patron, you support the work that they are doing and help create better quality content and a better society. By going to patreon.com/blacklikeme and signing up at any of the levels offered, you are not only signing up to make a monthly donation, you are also joining a growing community of people interested in engaging the issue of race with a raw, unprecedented honesty. As a patron of the podcast, you will have access to exclusive content like extended interviews, bonus rants, and video chats with Dr. G. You will also have a chance to join the conversation that other patrons are already having with Dr. G about race in America. To become a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/blacklikeme or see the link in our show notes. And for as little as $2, you can support these important conversations and the work that Dr. G is doing. Thank you in advance.
That's really powerful. Even when it feels like happy days are here again, or happy days are here, whether this is again or not, the sense of complacency is dangerous. Because I have to say, when I was in office, my Black friends and people of color were hyperly vigilant. We're like, did you hear that? Did you hear that? Okay, now he's saying this. I think in one of my episodes, way back, like when the Starbucks fiasco happened in Philadelphia, and I did a story about Starbucks and Trump or something. I said, come on, people. Trump is not smart enough to have created this systemic racism, but he is a ventriloquist puppet that sits on America's lap, and he does mouth what America has been wanting to say.
Yes.
And in some places very subtly, others not so subtly, has been saying, but let's not make a mistake. He's not creating this. He might be emboldening people emboldening people, but he's not creating this. He's merely a ventriloquist puppet that's saying what the ventriloquist America has been wanting to say. So at least while he was saying these egregious things, we were on edge, but he reminded people racism is here, it's alive. If we quickly start riding off into the sunset, like at the end of a horror flick where that little happy music starts to play and you think that nothing's going to jump out at you, it's that place of vulnerability and not being prepared, not being vigilant, that you're more prone to destruction. And so I'm finding, even though it seems like these are happy times, that I almost have to shout it from the mountaintops even more, because I felt like we were stimulated, even if not fully woke, we were stimulated during Trump. What you said about complacency is so powerful, because that leaves us prone to a greater setback.
Yeah, I think that Trump gave permission. He almost like there's a valve of steam that he opened and let out all this pressure of resentment that white people felt like, we don't get to say this anymore, right? Oh, he's giving permission for us to express what we've been sitting on and suppressing, peace, political correctness. All that critique is really a way to say, I want to be able to express my bigotry with no consequences. And, Carol Anderson's beautiful, powerful book, White Rage, where she basically says that every inch of Black progress has been met with white rage.
Yes, it has.
And we see like that on steroids in response to Obama's presidency. It was harder for me to do my work. And as part of what I hear you saying during those years, because white people would just say, well, we're post-racial now. We have a Black president. It'd be like, well, nobody's in denial now. We are so not post-racial. But one of the things, I'm going to imagine your audience, the white members of your audience, are identify as progressives, right?
Definitely.
And it's really easy to look over there and at the white nationalists, at the Oath Keepers, at the Proud Boys, at the Marjorie Taylor Greens, and see them as the problem. And we always need to ask ourselves, okay, I'm not a white nationalist, but I play a role in this. I was conditioned into this system. I was born into it. I have breathed it in my whole life. And it does come out in my life. And it comes out differently than it does for someone who would be an explicit racist. I think of myself as an implicit racist. There's no way I have not absorbed the ideology of white supremacy. We've all absorbed it. Sure. So the question has to change from if I'm racist or if I'm part of the problem, to which most white people, what are we going to answer? No, I had a Black roommate in college. I listened to Dr. G's program. I'm not racist. We need to change that question from if to how. How am I? What part do I play? Right. And that has to be ongoing. We're never going to be the choir or have arrived. The moment I think I'm the choir as a white person, I'm going to be complacent. I'm going to be actually fairly defensive about any suggestion to the contrary. There's a claim I make in White Fragility that's really provocative. I always get asked about it. I say, I think white progressives cause the most daily harm to Black people and other people of color. And people are like, what? Well, that one or two token Black folks in your overwhelmingly white nonprofit are going home exhausted every day. Who's sending them home exhausted? Who's sending them home agonizing about whether it's worth it to try to talk to you or not? That's me. That's all the well-meaning white folks, right? Yes. Our manifestation of this is more insidious. It's harder to get your hands on. There's more gaslighting. I know lots of Black folks, and you check me if I misspeak here, but a lot of Black folks say, oh, give me an Oath Keeper. I mean, I know where he's coming from.
I know how to talk. I know how to avoid them. You are absolutely right. It's like reading my mail, Dr. DiAngelo. You're right. We started this U.S. Black History course It's a 9-week course helping we refer to people as would-be allies to
Mm-hmm.
understand, to look at U.S. history, not just Black history, but U.S. history and the Black experience within it. It's 4 professors, 3 of whom are white men, and it did that purposefully. But when one of our funders walked through to see this, I mean, we have 250, 270 white people sitting in our auditorium in February in Wisconsin for 9 weeks. He said, Alex, you're singing to the choir. I know these people. I see them at cultural gatherings. They get it. Why aren't you working with white extremists? And I said, well, they either need a psychiatrist or an exorcist, but that's not my work. I said, but in my experience, white progressives have been the problem. They're the ones that have said, Alex, don't be angry. I feel like you're throwing all of us away. Or like you and I talked about before, in the nonprofit world that's largely led by white women,
Mm-hmm.
weaponizing the tears and slow up the discussion because the response is, I feel this is so cruel with all that I've done and what I've said. That's what's draining. I know how to cuss a Proud Boy out. I know how to tell him what to kiss, what to do, which finger to show him.
Yep.
And I actually feel a little vindicated when I go home, like, I voiced it. But the person who's trying to get it, I've adopted Black people, I dated Black people. Robin, I actually have people stop me and say, Alex, I lost my virginity to a Black guy. Like, and we're at a concert outside, like at a civic event. I mean, I'm a pastor. I'm like, am I supposed to give you a gold star? Do you want the fist bump? Do you want me to show you the soul shake? Do you want me to share some hot sauce with you? Like, why the hell, what in your head tells you now that I think you're safe because you were bedded by someone who's Black? How off are you to say that to someone? How deep are you willing to go to prove your progressive nature? That frightened me because I thought this person's out of context, and that's happened to me twice.
It feels like an unconscious lack of respect for you as a person, as a Black man, as a pastor, right? To say something like that, again, not intentional. And this is what you just want to, I want my people, because I'm a white progressive, right? White progressives are my specialty. I just wish we understood that so much of what we offer up as evidence is not convincing to Black people. It's not convincing to anybody who understands systemic racism.
No, it's not convincing. It's not.
No, right. Like, I mean,
at all.
no, it's not. And what you're probably rolling your eyes inside your head, and what you just told that person is that you not only don't understand it, but are likely a dangerous person to them, right? You're likely not going to be receptive to any information to the contrary. I give talks all the time too. I haven't been out in the world in a year, but when I would come to a place and the white organizers would say, you're talking to the choir. And then the Black folks behind the scene would pull me aside and say, oh my God, thank you. I'm so glad you're here. Help us. My next book comes out in June, and it is called Nice Racism. How progressive white people perpetuate racial harm. And I have a chapter called There Is No Choir. And I also have a chapter called The Moves of White Progressives. And one of those is making sure everybody knows you're married to a Black man. And it's very similar to White Women's Cheers. It isn't, okay, if I was married to a Black man, of course it's a part of my life. Of course it's a source of understanding. I'm not saying I couldn't share that, but when, how, and why I'm sharing it, when that's the first thing out of my mouth to make sure I'm not racist, that's problematic. Right. What I just told you is I don't have a nuanced understanding. And I don't understand for Black women how potentially sensitive that is for me to go, making sure everybody knows I'm married to a Black man. I don't know my history. Right. I have revealed so much as I think I've just certified myself.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's powerful. That is so powerful. And I know your schedule is going to be so stacked up when that happens. I want you to know you have a strong following in Madison. And so we've got to find a way to get you back when that book comes out, Dr. DeAngelo, and just talk to folks because people in Madison love to read books and they love to talk with authors and they love to have the Robin DiAngelos and the Brian Stevensons. They love. And
Great. It's good to hear. And on that note, before you ever forward anything, check the source.
Yes.
I'm just talking about, there's a lot of press out there from all different sides. And I'm always just disheartened by how people will forward something that's really got a right-wing agenda and will pick up the talking points of the right and do their business for them.
Definitely. Well, Dr. DeAngelo, thank you so much for talking with me today. This is our second discussion, and you've dropped some pearls of wisdom again. So thank you very much for being a special guest on Black Like Me podcast.
It was an honor to be in conversation with you. Thank you so much.
Black Like Me. Black like.
This has been another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Special shout out to Eli and to Jeremy, who are my engineers and my editors on this, to Don Thornton, who is my podcast manager, who makes sure that we line all of this up, to Corey Saffold, who is responsible for that exciting new jingle, that Black Like Me jingle. I'm so excited about that. And to vocals by Marcus Fleming.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.